Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Renuka R.S. bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacts with the Indian contingent for the upcoming Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. India to elect a new president after counting of votes on Thursday. Ranil Wickremesinghe is the new president of Sri Lanka. Rishi Sunak tops the fifth round of voting for the British Prime Minister. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates lauds India for its success in curbing COVID-19 outbreak. EU urges countries to reduce gas demand by 15% amid threat of Russian cuts. India and Namibia sign an MOU on wildlife conservation and sustainable biodiversity utilization. Bangladesh Liberation War fighters meet Assam Chief Minister. And in badminton, P. Kashyap and three other Indian shuttlers enter the second round of Taipei Open Super 300 tournament. And now the news in detail. Prime Minister Narendra Modi today wished the Indian contingent the very best for Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. He expressed confidence that the athletes who are taking part in Commonwealth Games 2022 for the first time will also make a tremendous impact. Interacting with the Indian contingent bound for the Games in Birmingham, PM asked players to play with all their heart, play hard, play with full force and will play without any tension. The interaction is part of the continuous endeavor to motivate athletes ahead of their participation in major sporting events. He urged athletes to go with the mantra of "Kyun pade ho chakkar mein, koi nahi hai takkar mein" when they face their opponents. He stressed that this is the most important period in the history of Indian sports as training is getting better and atmosphere in the country towards sports is also tremendous. The Prime Minister remarked that the athletes are going to the Commonwealth Games at a time when the country is celebrating 75 years of independence. He hoped that all the athletes would showcase their best performance, which will be a gift for the country. The counting of votes for the 16th presidential election will be taken up tomorrow. It will start at 11 a.m. in the Parliament House complex. Our correspondent reports that polling was held at Parliament House and state assemblies across the country on Monday. More on this report.
Over 99% electors turnout was recorded in the presidential election. 100% voting by MLAs was reported from 11 states and Union Territory of Puducherry. The states are Chhattisgarh, Goa, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Kerala, Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Manipur, Mizoram, Sikkim and Tamil Nadu. Former Jharkhand Governor Draupadi Murmu is the NDA candidate for the presidential election. Regional parties including Biju Janata Dal, YSR Congress Party, Janata Dal Secular, Shiromani Akali Dal, AIADMK and Jharkhand Mukti Morcha are supporting Ms. Murmu. Former Union Minister Yashwant Sinha is the opposition candidate for the country's top post. The term of incumbent President Ram Nath Kovind will end on 24th of this month. With Anand Kumar, Anupam Mishra, AI News, Delhi.
Sri Lanka's acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe won a vote in Parliament today to be the next president until 2024, taking over from former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who resigned after fleeing the country last week. He roundly defeated his main rival for the job, Dulus Alha-Peruma, with 134 votes to 82 in a parliamentary vote. Mr. Wickremesinghe faces the task of leading the country out of its economic collapse and restoring orders after months of mass protests. A former six-time Prime Minister, he failed in his previous two rounds for the presidency. His victory means he will serve out of the rest of the presidential term until November 2024. Rishi Sunak is now the closest anyone of Indian origin has ever been to take charge as British Prime Minister after his Conservative Party colleagues voted overwhelmingly in his favour with 137 votes in the final round today. In the fifth round of voting involving three contestants, Sunak topped with 137 votes, followed by Liz Truss with 113. Penny Mordaunt received 105 votes, the lowest in Wednesday's contest, and was eliminated from the race. Sunak continues with his impressive performance, topping every round of voting so far and by a fair margin.
A U.S. judge has ordered that Twitter's lawsuit against Elon Musk go to trial in October, a blow to the world's richest man who had asked for a delay. Mr. Musk walked away from his $44 billion bid to buy Twitter earlier in July, prompting the company to sue him. Twitter hopes that the court will order Mr. Musk to complete the takeover at the agreed price of $54.20 per share. The tech billionaire has accused Twitter of withholding information about fake accounts. His legal team has called for the trial to be held early next year due to its complexities, but Twitter asked for a September date. A 25-member delegation of Liberation War Fighters of Bangladesh met Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma in Guwahati. Welcoming the Mukti Jodhas, Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma expressed happiness at their 3-day-long visit to Guwahati and Shillong, organized by the High Commission of India and the Ministry of Act East Policy Affairs, Government of Assam. The visit is part of the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav and Swarnim Vijay Varsh celebrations to mark 75 years of India's independence and 50 years of the liberation of Bangladesh. Speaking on the occasion, Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma said that the Bangladesh Liberation War was a landmark event where 9 valiant soldiers from Assam made the supreme sacrifice. Some Assam police officers had also trained the Mukti Bahini members during the 1971 Liberation War. The Chief Minister recalled that the civil society of Assam had come forward to help the refugees who came from the then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. Chief Minister Sarma praised Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for her determination to fight terrorism and extremism, which helped in ensuring peace both inside and outside Bangladesh. He said that the tough action against ULFA inside Bangladesh helped Assam to become peaceful.
On this day in 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first men to walk on the moon. The United States Apollo 11 was the first crewed mission to land on the moon on 20th July 1969.
On July 20, 1969, millions of people gathered around their televisions to watch 2 U.S. astronauts do something no one had ever done before. Wearing bulky space suits and backpacks of oxygen to breathe, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin became the first human beings to walk on the moon. Before touching down, the 3 men split up. Collins boarded Apollo 11's command module, the Columbia, where he would remain in orbit around the moon. Armstrong and Aldrin boarded Apollo 11's lunar module, the Eagle, and began to descend to the moon's surface. After the 2 stepped onto the lunar surface, Armstrong proclaimed these famous words: "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Anita Anand for World News, All India Radio.
There were 6 crewed U.S. landings between 1969 and 1972 and numerous uncrewed landings, with no soft landings happening between 22 August 1976 and 14th of December 2013. The United States is the only country to have successfully conducted crewed missions to the moon, with the last departing the lunar surface in December 1972. Co-founder of Microsoft, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and WHO mega donor Bill Gates has once again acclaimed India for its success in curbing the COVID-19 outbreak, when Premier Narendra Modi said that his nation exceeded the special figure of 2 billion inoculations in a year and a half. Gates took to Twitter and lauded the efforts made by Prime Minister Modi to battle the COVID-19 pandemic across India, and also expressed gratitude for the continued partnership with Indian vaccine manufacturers and the government for mitigating the impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
The European Commission has unveiled an emergency plan to scale back gas consumption in case Russia totally cuts off supplies, which Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has said is a likely scenario.
The emergency plan proposes that member states to engage in voluntary measures to reduce consumption. All EU member states are asked to reduce gas demand by 15% between August and April. The proposal also allows Brussels the ability to trigger an emergency alert that requires mandatory gas demand reduction throughout the bloc. This is a signal to all public bodies, consumers, households, owners of public buildings, power suppliers, and that they must now take extraordinary and rapid rapid measures to save gas, the proposal said. EU countries are largely responsible for their own energy policies. The emergency plan proposal would need member states' approval before being put in place. European countries depend on gas both for power and heating, and a colder winter threatens a dire situation later in the year if Russia further restricts supplies because of the EU's continued support for Ukraine. European governments are also closely monitoring if Russian gas flows through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline through Germany will restart as planned on Thursday after a scheduled maintenance period. Anita Anand for World News, All India Radio.
In 2021, 40% of the EU's gas was imported from Russia. And now, in today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on developments in Sri Lanka. In conversation are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the crisis in Sri Lanka, which we have seen for the past few months, where the country's economic and political crisis seems to be getting worse with every day. We now have a new president in Sri Lanka, Ranil Wickremesinghe, and he will take charge of a country which is in the midst of a major political and economic crisis. Ambassador Sajjanhar, when you see, and we've all been watching the developments in Sri Lanka these last few months, and we finally have Ranil Wickremesinghe now taking charge as president, how do you see this working out in the next few days or few weeks as we look at Sri Lanka?
Thank you very much, Simran. I think the uncertainty which we had hoped would come down as a result of the election of the new president after the former president Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled, that uncertainty has not disappeared or come down even significantly. It was hoped and thought that as per the constitution, the new president is elected, he will be able to establish control, he will be able to take charge. But then we see that there are protests against Ranil Wickremesinghe on the streets of Colombo, on the streets of some of the other cities in Sri Lanka. And as had happened in the case of both Mahinda Rajapaksa, the Prime Minister, who left on the 9th of May, and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the President, who tendered his resignation by email on the 14th of this month. There are protests and demonstrations with the chants of "Go home, Ranil, go Ranil, go." So it continues to be an uncertain situation. Ranil Wickremesinghe, when he took over as the acting president, he had imposed emergency in the country because he doesn't want that there should be breakdown of law and order. So going forward, we'll have to wait and see how well the law enforcement authorities are able to establish control, are able to ensure that there is a semblance of peace and quiet and tranquility and stability, so that the major task of economic recovery and economic revival can take place. But I think the next few days are going to be very crucial and critical in this regard.
Mr. Sajjanhar, we've also seen that the protesters who've been out protesting, they've also been critical of Wickremesinghe. They look at him as an ally of the Rajapaksas, who have been at the receiving end of the protesters in Sri Lanka. How do you feel this factor will play in as we move along?
Well, Simran, that is exactly what I had meant. That is exactly what I had implied. That although he might have won the vote of confidence as far as the parliament is concerned, but on the streets of the country, on the streets of Colombo particularly, he doesn't have any support whatsoever. Because what these protesters, whom Ranil Wickremesinghe himself has called fascists, and they don't want Ranil Wickremesinghe to be in any position of power or authority. They think that he is also colluding with the Rajapaksas, that he is out there to protect their interests. And the fact that he was put in place on the 13th of May after Mahinda Rajapaksa left as Prime Minister, that this is proof that he has been brought in there to protect and save the interests of the Rajapaksa clan. But I think here it also needs to be remembered that first Gotabaya Rajapaksa had offered the position of the Prime Minister to Sajith Premadasa, to the leader of the opposition. But when he refused to take it, when he refused to accept it, then only it was offered to Ranil Wickremesinghe. And this time also the ruling party, that is Gotabaya Rajapaksa's party, SLPP, they have also stated, because they have a majority in the parliament, they have also stated that they have gone in to support Ranil Wickremesinghe because he is a highly experienced administrator, and in politics, in foreign policy, in diplomacy, he is very experienced. He has been the Prime Minister of the country 6 times, and even now he was in conversation, in negotiations with the IMF. And IMF has emerged as the most important international agency, international organization with which Sri Lanka will have to work together if it wants to see that it comes out of this very critical state of affairs, the worst economic and political crisis to have hit this island nation over the last more than 74 years since it became.
Master Sajanhar, we also see that one of the reasons why Sri Lanka is facing the economic problems that it is also because of the loans that it took. And one country which figures mainly in that is China, where China we saw was investing and giving loans, and what we call the debt trap diplomacy, we saw it in full swing in Sri Lanka. How far do you think is it fair to blame China also for the economic crisis in Sri Lanka today?
Well, I think it is not, I would not use the word blame. It is a statement of fact. If you look at the figures, of course, if you speak to the Chinese, they say that Sri Lanka owes only 10% of its debt to China. And it also owes 10% of its debt to Japan. So it seems to imply that it is in no different situation than Japan is. And even as far as the Sri Lankan politicians are concerned, they also seem to make the same argument that China is owed only 10% of the debt. But I think what both of them knowingly, in my view, purposely, in my view, there is a huge chunk of more than 40% of the debt, which is said to have come from private sources. And that is the debt that has been given by the state-owned enterprises from China, much of that. And as you mentioned, this debt trap that it has fallen under. And it is not only China, it's not only Sri Lanka which has fallen under this debt trap, but there are a number of other countries which have been provided this loans by under the Belt and Road Initiative of China. And they are also facing the same problem, the same difficulty. And I'm sure going forward, they are also going to witness similar experiences as Sri Lanka has, whether it is Pakistan or Nepal. In fact, one of the international agencies had brought out a report on how the BRI projects of that are funded by China around the world are working. And there are several countries in which the projects that have been undertaken are not economically viable, they are not sustainable. These countries are not getting any benefits in terms of creating jobs or importing technology. So I think this is definitely a very important reason for Sri Lanka to have unfortunately gone down this track. And what is even more disappointing and worrisome from the point of view of Sri Lanka, and I think it should be taken cognizance of by the other countries who are also in similar straits, is that China has refused to come to the aid of Sri Lanka in its very critical moments. In fact, the former President Gotabaya Rajapakse himself in an interview had suggested that China does not appear to be that actively engaged or interested in Sri Lanka now, because it has diverted, it has disengaged itself and got disinterested. It has shifted its focus and attention to other regions, to other areas. Now that is a very worrisome matter, because there's a huge debt trap under which Sri Lanka finds itself. We know as far as the Hambantota port is concerned, about $1.2 billion was spent by China on this. It is not at all an economically viable or sustainable initiative, infrastructure project. Hardly any ships come to that port. But of course, for its geostrategic interests, it would be very important as far as China is concerned. So I think the other countries also need to take lessons from what is happening in Sri Lanka. And in the briefing that the External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman had yesterday, there also the External Affairs Minister mentioned that China is nowhere even in the comparison zone in terms of assisting, supporting and helping Sri Lanka when you compare to what India has done. And India has gone out of its way to provide more than $3.8 billion of support and assistance to Sri Lanka just over the last 5-6 months.
With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on our Twitter handle at AIR News Alerts.
India and Namibia today signed an MOU on wildlife conservation and sustainable biodiversity utilization for establishing the cheetah into the historical range in India. The MOU was signed between Vice President of Namibia, Nangolo Mmuba, and Environment, Forest and Climate Change Minister Bhupendra Yadav in New Delhi. Mr. Yadav said the MOU seeks to promote conservation and restoration of cheetah in their former range from which the species went extinct. Cheetah has a very special significance for the national conservation ethic and ethos. Bringing the cheetah back to India will have equally important conservation ramifications. Cheetah restoration will be part of a prototype for restoration of original cheetah habitats and their biodiversity, helping to stem the degradation and rapid loss of biodiversity. Moscow's military tasks in Ukraine now go beyond the eastern Donbas region, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Wednesday, as the Kremlin's forces shelled eastern and southern Ukraine. Lavrov also told state news agency RIA Novosti that Russia's objectives will expand still further if the West keeps supplying Kyiv with long-range weapons such as the US-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems. Moscow's military tasks in Ukraine now go beyond the eastern Donbas region, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Wednesday.
Hundreds of people were evacuated early Wednesday as firefighters deployed planes and helicopters to fight a surging wildfire in mountainside suburbs north of Athens for a second day. Nearly 500 firefighters, 120 vehicles, 3 planes and 4 helicopters swung into action from dawn to battle the flames from spreading to the suburbs of Penteli, Antulsa and Gerakas, which is home to some 29,000 people. In badminton, Parupalli Kashyap, Kiran George, Mithun Manjunath and Priyanshu Rajvat entered into the second round of men's singles of the Taipei Open Super 300 tournament in Taipei today. They beat their opponents in straight sets. Parupalli Kashyap beat Shi Yu Shen 24-21-10. Kiran George defeated Ade Reski Dwikahi 23-21, 21-17. Mithun Manjunath thrashed Kim Brun 21-17, 21-15 and Priyanshu Rajvat beat Yusheng Po 21-16, 21-15. In men's doubles, Indian pairs Krishna Prasad and Vishnu Vardhan and P.S. Ravi Krishna and Sankar Prasad Uday Kumar lost to their opponents today. In women's single, Smith Toshniwal and Malvika Bansod also lost their matches today. The Sensex and the Nifty today gained more than 1%. Both indices rose amid positive global cues. The Sensex closed near 55,400 points while the Nifty reclaimed the 16,500 mark. A report from the business desk.
Sensex climbed by 630 points or 1.15% to end at 55,398, while Nifty surged by 180 points or 1.1% to finish at 16,521. At the global stock markets, Asian stock indices posted gains following overnight robust gains in the US share markets after strong company earnings reports. Japan's Nikkei 225 surged by 2.7%, Singapore Straits Times closed by 1.7% up, and South Korea's Kospi climbed 0.7%. China's Shanghai Composite Index gained 0.8% and Hong Kong's Hang Seng added 1.1%. European markets were also up in intraday trade. Crude prices fell around 2% in intraday trade. Brent crude was trading at $105.40 per barrel. And in the foreign exchange market, the rupee weakened by 4 paise against the US dollar. The domestic currency closed at 79 rupees and 99 paise against the American unit. Arjun Chowdhury for World News, All India Radio.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. First, we have a look at the press reports on China. Bloomberg reports former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger warns Biden against endless confrontation with China. He said, geopolitics today requires Nixonian flexibility to help diffuse conflicts between the U.S. and China, as well as between Russia and the rest of the Europe. Reuters reports China approved the construction of 8.63 gigawatts of coal power in the first quarter of this year, nearly half the amount seen in all of 2021, as energy security trumps climate concerns, environment group Greenpeace said on Wednesday. China has vowed to strictly control coal power capacity over the 2021-25 period as it bids to bring its climate-warming carbon dioxide emissions, the highest in the world, to a peak by 2030.
Now let us have a look at the press reports on Nepal. Khabar Hub reports that the CPN Maoist Centre Chairman Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda has welcomed the decision of the Nepali Congress to give continuity to the coalition in the upcoming federal and provincial elections. The Rising Nepal writes that the positivity rate of the coronavirus infection has crossed more than 10% after more than 5 months. According to the data from the Ministry of Health and Population MOHP, the rate of coronavirus infection was recorded at 10.63% on Tuesday. Now, let's have a look at the press reports from Pakistan. Geo News reports that Finance Minister Miftah Ismail said on Tuesday it was the coalition government's priority to save Pakistan from defaulting after the rupee hit an all-time high against the dollar and the stocks took a battering during the day's trade. The Pakistani rupee hit a record low of 224 against the dollar in the afternoon interbank trade before closing at 221.99, the highest day-on-day depreciation after June 26. The Express Tribune writes that the lashing out at former Prime Minister Imran Khan for doing politics of hate, Defence Minister Khwaja Asif has said that the PTI chief has divided the nation in such a way that this divide might never go away.
Now let's have a look at the press reports from Balochistan. Balochistan Post writes that 5 of the 9 men killed by the Pakistani army in Ziyarat district of Balochistan in past few days have been identified as forcibly disappeared persons allegedly by the Pakistani forces. The Express Tribune says endemic diseases like cholera, gastroenteritis and diarrhea affected around 3,000 people over the last week as the Balochistan government announced emergency in all the 16 districts hit by the ailments. Now let's have a look at the press reports on Bangladesh. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has invited the West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee to Bangladesh. Daily Star in its report said that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has written a letter to West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee.
Now a quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacts with the Indian contingent for the upcoming Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. India to elect a new president after counting of votes on Thursday. Ranil Wickremesinghe is the new president of Sri Lanka. Rishi Sunak tops the 5th round of voting for the British Prime Minister. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates lauds India for its success in curbing COVID-19 outbreak. EU urges countries to reduce gas demand by 15% amid a threat of Russian cuts. India and Namibia sign an MOU on wildfire conservation and sustainable biodiversity utilization. Bangladesh Liberation War fighters meet Assam Chief Minister. And in badminton, P. Kashyap and 3 other Indian shuttlers enter the second round of Taipei Open Super 300 tournament. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Slovenia.
Himal
with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.